I wanted to surprise my husband on his business trip. What I heard when I arrived changed everything. Hook, the moment everything shattered. She stood in that hallway for what felt like an eternity, one hand gripping her overnight bag, the other hovering inches from the door. Room 412. She'd memorized the number from his calendar, circled it in her mind 100 times during the flight. It was supposed to be simple. Knock twice, watch his face light up, laugh about how she'd managed to pull off the surprise of their 15-year marriage. But now, with her knuckles an inch from the wood, she couldn't move. Because she could hear them. His voice, familiar and warm, the way it used to sound when they first met. And then another voice. A woman's laugh, light and easy, like they'd done this 1,000 times before. Her heart didn't race. It stopped. Completely. And in that suffocating silence inside her chest, she heard something that made her knees buckle. Her own name, spoken by a stranger, in her husband's hotel room, at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. What she discovered in the seconds that followed would unravel everything she thought she knew about her marriage and expose a truth that had been hiding in plain sight for years. Stay with me, because the truth behind this moment is far more disturbing than you think. Tease the central mystery. This isn't just a story about infidelity. It's about trust, deception, and the moment a life you thought you understood collapses in seconds. Who was the woman inside that room? Was this betrayal or something far more calculated? And why did this surprise visit trigger a chain of events that no one, not even her husband, could undo? How well do you really know the person you married? What would you do if you were standing outside that door, hearing your name spoken by someone who shouldn't even know you exist? These questions haunted her every step of the way. And before the night was over, she'd have answers that would change everything. Backstory: the marriage everyone envied. Her name was Claire, 43 years old, high school English teacher, mother of 2 teenagers who were finally becoming independent enough that she could breathe again. She wasn't the type to make impulsive decisions. Every major choice in her life had been carefully considered, weighed, discussed. That's how she'd been raised. You didn't chase fantasies. You built something solid, and she had. A house in a quiet suburb outside of Charlotte, a garden she tended every Sunday, a marriage that had survived the usual rough patches, job changes, a health scare, the slow drift that happens when you're raising kids and just trying to make it through the week. But she believed in the foundation. She believed in him. His name was David, 46, senior account manager at a firm that sent him traveling 3 weeks out of every month. Boston, Denver, Chicago, sometimes Dallas. He was good at his job, charming in that effortless way that made clients feel like they were the only person in the room. People liked him, trusted him. Claire had always been proud of that. He provided well, never complained about the grind, always came home with stories that made the kids laugh. But over the past year, something had shifted. Nothing she could name exactly, just a feeling. The way he'd started sleeping with his phone face down. The way he'd pause before answering simple questions. The way he'd stopped asking about her day. She told herself it was work stress. He told her it was work stress. And she believed him, because that's what 15 years of marriage had taught her to do. Trust until you have a reason not to. But 2 weeks ago, their anniversary had come and gone with barely a mention. He'd sent flowers to her classroom with a generic card that could have been written by his assistant. And that night, lying awake, while he slept soundly beside her, Claire made a decision. She would surprise him. Fly out to his next work trip. Show up at his hotel. Remind him of what they'd built together. It felt romantic, spontaneous, the kind of thing that could reset a relationship that had gotten too routine. So she booked a flight, told the kids she was visiting her sister for the weekend, checked his work calendar, and found the hotel reservation, the Grandview in Nashville, a 4-star hotel near the convention center where his company was hosting a 3-day client summit. She imagined his face when she knocked, the shock, the smile. Maybe they'd order room service and talk the way they used to, back when conversation didn't feel like checking off boxes. Maybe this was exactly what they needed. She had no idea she was walking into the truth. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The incident outside the hotel door. The flight landed at 8:47 p.m. She took a taxi straight to the hotel, her stomach fluttering with the kind of nervous excitement she hadn't felt in years. The lobby was elegant, understated. Marble floors, soft lighting, a pianist playing something jazzy near the bar. She felt out of place in her jeans and sweater, but it didn't matter. She wasn't here to impress anyone but him. The front desk clerk smiled politely when she asked for directions to the 4th floor. She didn't ask for a key. She wanted the surprise to be complete. The elevator ride felt endless. Her reflection stared back at her in the polished metal doors, and for a moment she wondered if this was a mistake. What if he was in a meeting? What if he was exhausted and just wanted to sleep? But then the doors opened, and she stepped into the carpeted hallway, and the doubt faded. She was here. She was doing something bold, something that mattered. Room 412 was at the end of the hall, past a vending machine and an ice dispenser that hummed quietly. The hallway was empty, silent except for the muffled sound of a television behind one of the doors. She reached his room and stopped. That's when she heard it. His voice, low, relaxed, the way he sounded when he was comfortable. And then, another voice, a woman, laughing at something he'd just said. Claire's hand froze halfway to the door. Her brain scrambled to make sense of it. Maybe it was the TV. Maybe he was on a video call. Maybe there was a logical explanation that would make her feel foolish for even hesitating. But then the woman spoke again, and this time Claire heard the words clearly. "You really think she has no idea?" Silence. Then David's voice, quieter now. "Claire doesn't pay attention to details like that. She trusts me." The woman laughed again, softer this time. "That's convenient." Claire's legs went numb. Her vision blurred at the edges. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't move. She stood there, one hand still gripping her bag, the other pressed flat against the wall to keep herself upright. And then she heard her name again, this time in a sentence that made her stomach drop. "Once the paperwork's finalized, Claire won't even see it coming." The woman's voice was calm, almost clinical. "You've done this perfectly, David. She'll get the bare minimum, and by the time she figures it out, it'll be too late to fight back." Claire didn't knock. She didn't scream. She didn't burst through the door like every instinct told her to. She turned around, walked back to the elevator, rode down to the lobby, got back in a taxi and checked into a different hotel 3 blocks away. And then she sat on the edge of a strange bed in a strange room and tried to understand what she'd just heard. Because it wasn't an affair. It was a plan. And she was the target. Aftermath and investigation, nothing makes sense. She didn't sleep that night. She sat in the dark with her laptop open, searching through emails she hadn't thought to question before, bank statements she'd signed without reading, credit card charges for hotels she'd assumed were work trips. And slowly, piece by piece, a pattern emerged. Charges at the same hotel in Nashville, going back 18 months. Receipts for dinners for 2. Expenses that didn't match his work schedule. She opened his cloud storage, something they'd shared since the kids were born, back when they used to upload family photos and grocery lists. He'd changed the password 6 months ago, told her it was for security reasons. She'd believed him, but she knew his patterns. She'd been married to him for 15 years. She tried his birthday, their anniversary, the kids' names. Nothing worked. Then she tried the name of the street where they'd bought their first house, and it opened. Inside were folders she didn't recognize, financial documents, legal drafts, an LLC registered in his name only, a separate bank account she'd never seen, and emails, dozens of them, between David and a woman named Jessica Brennan. Jessica wasn't a colleague. She was a paralegal at a family law firm in Raleigh, and the emails weren't romantic. They were transactional, cold, methodical. He was asking about asset protection strategies, how to move money without triggering alerts, how to file for divorce in a way that would minimize what Claire could claim. Jessica's responses were professional, detailed, and chillingly efficient. She was helping him dismantle their marriage from the inside, and Claire had been completely unaware. The earliest email was dated 14 months ago, just after their last anniversary. The same week David had told her he was being considered for a promotion that would require even more travel. The same week he'd suggested they hold off on any major purchases until his bonus came through. The same week he'd started sleeping with his phone in the bathroom. Claire sat back in the hotel chair and stared at the screen. Her hands were shaking, not from anger, from clarity. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't a midlife crisis. This was calculated. He'd been planning to leave her for over a year, and he'd been using that time to make sure she'd walk away with as little as possible. She thought about the house, the retirement accounts, the college funds they'd built together, all in his name because that's how they'd always done it. He earned more. It made sense. She'd never questioned it. Why would she? They were a team, or so she'd thought. Now she realized she'd been playing a game where only he knew the rules, and he'd been winning for months. But here's the thing about Claire. She wasn't impulsive, but she wasn't weak, and she'd just been handed the one thing David never expected her to have: information, evidence, and time, because he still thought she was home, blissfully unaware, waiting for him to come back and play the role of devoted husband for a few more weeks until he was ready to pull the trigger. He had no idea she was 3 blocks away, reading every word of his plan. And that gave her something she hadn't felt in months: control. If you're still watching at this point, comment, "I'm still here," and tell me what state you're watching from. Let's see who's really paying attention. The twist, the truth, comes out. Claire didn't confront him that night, or the next morning. She flew home, unpacked her bag, picked up the kids from her mother's house, and went back to her normal routine. She smiled when David called to check in, laughed at his stories about the client summit, asked about his flight home, and when he walked through the door on Friday evening, she hugged him like she always did. He had no idea she knew. That was her advantage now, and she was going to use it. Over the next 2 weeks, Claire did something she'd never done before. She consulted a lawyer, not just any lawyer, one of the top family law attorneys in the state, a woman named Margaret Hastings, who had a reputation for going to war when her clients were being played. Margaret listened to everything, reviewed the emails, the bank statements, the LLC documents, the correspondence with Jessica Brennan, and then she smiled. Not a warm smile, a strategic one. "He's been setting this up for over a year," Margaret said. "But he made mistakes, big ones, and we're going to use every single one." Turns out, moving marital assets into a separate account without disclosure is illegal. Setting up an LLC with joint funds and not informing your spouse is grounds for fraud. And coordinating with a paralegal to hide assets before filing for divorce? That's the kind of thing that gets lawyers disbarred and husbands destroyed in court. David thought he was being clever. He thought he was 10 steps ahead, but he'd left a trail, and Claire had found it. Margaret drafted a response plan. They'd let David make the first move, let him file, let him think he had the upper hand, and then they'd bury him with his own evidence. 3 weeks later, David sat Claire down in their living room. The kids were at a sleepover. He'd poured himself a scotch. His hands were steady. His voice was calm. "Claire, we need to talk." She looked at him with the same trusting eyes she'd always had. "Okay." He took a breath. "I think we've been growing apart for a while now, and I think it's time we were honest about what this marriage has become." She nodded slowly. Let him continue. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. I think we should file for a legal separation. It'll be amicable, fair. We'll split things down the middle, make sure the kids are taken care of, and we can both move on." Claire didn't react. She just sat there, hands folded in her lap, looking at the man she'd spent 15 years building a life with. The man who just lied to her face. "Down the middle," she repeated quietly. "That sounds fair." David relaxed, smiled. "I'm glad you're being reasonable about this." She nodded again. Then she stood up, walked to the kitchen, and came back with a folder. She set it on the coffee table between them. "Before we do that," she said, her voice steady, "I think you should look at this." David opened the folder, and his face went white. Inside were printed copies of every email, every bank statement, every document he thought was hidden, the LLC, the account in his name, the correspondence with Jessica Brennan, the timeline showing 14 months of planning, and at the very top, a letter from Margaret Hastings, outlining the legal consequences of financial fraud, asset concealment, and conspiracy to defraud a spouse during marriage. David looked up at her, and for the first time in their entire marriage, she saw fear in his eyes. "Where did you get this?" She smiled, not bitterly, not angrily, just calmly. "I was in Nashville, David. Room 412. I heard everything." The silence that followed was deafening. He tried to speak, tried to explain, tried to spin it into something she'd misunderstood, but there was nothing left to say. She knew, and more importantly, she had proof. "Here's what's going to happen," Claire said, her voice steady. "You're going to agree to a fair division of assets, 50-50. You're going to cover the kids' college funds in full. You're going to leave the house to me, and you're going to do it quietly, without dragging this through court, because if you don't, Margaret will file a countersuit for fraud, and you'll lose everything. Your reputation, your career, your relationship with the kids, everything." David stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "You wouldn't." She picked up the folder and stood. "Try me." Final twist and resolution, the choice she made. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. It wasn't amicable, but it was fair. David signed every document Margaret put in front of him. He didn't fight. He couldn't. Claire got the house full custody during the school year, and a settlement that ensured she and the kids would be financially secure. David moved to an apartment downtown, kept his job by the skin of his teeth, and saw his kids every other weekend. Jessica Brennan was quietly let go from the law firm after an internal review found she'd violated ethical guidelines. Claire never spoke to her, never needed to. The truth had done the work for her. But here's the part that surprised everyone, including Claire herself. She didn't spend the next year bitter. She didn't rage about what he'd done. She didn't waste time trying to make him pay emotionally. She focused on rebuilding. She went back to school part-time, started working toward a master's degree she'd put off for years. She reconnected with friends she'd lost touch with. She took the kids on a road trip that summer, just the 3 of them, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like herself again. Not someone's wife, not someone's target, just Claire. One evening, about a year after the divorce was final, her daughter asked her a question that stayed with her. "Mom, when did you know it was over?" Claire thought about it. About that night in the hotel hallway. About the sound of her own name being used like a pawn in someone else's game. And she realized something. "It wasn't over when I heard him with her," she said quietly. "It was over the moment he decided I didn't deserve the truth." Her daughter nodded. "Do you regret not confronting him right away?" Claire smiled. "Not for a second. Waiting gave me power, and that's something he never expected me to have. The truth is, this story isn't about revenge. It's about clarity. It's about the moment you realize that the person you thought you knew has been someone else all along. And it's about the choice you make when that moment comes. Do you fall apart, or do you stand up, take control, and rewrite the ending? Claire chose the latter. And in doing so, she discovered something more valuable than the marriage she lost. She discovered her own strength. Strong, close, plus engagement, CTA. So here's my question for you. Would you have confronted him at that door? Or would you have walked away like Claire did? Because I think that choice says a lot about who we are in our worst moments. Comment below. I read every single one. And if you think this story was shocking, wait until you hear what happened when another woman checked her husband's voicemail by accident and discovered a voice that wasn't supposed to exist. Subscribe for more real-life stories where one moment changes everything. And if this story stayed with you, send it to someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is reclaim your own narrative. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.